Good evening, people of Mount Zion and beyond. Welcome to our weekly Wednesday night Bible study. For the next however long this pandemic period lasts, I'll be picking up these Wednesday night services exactly where we left them off before and running through them pretty much exactly the way that we ran them before. And so, as usual, we'll be starting off our Wednesday night Bible study by running through the Roman Road. The Roman Road is a helpful tool that you can use for any number of things. You can use it as a tool to share the gospel if you go door to door or something like that, or you can use it to explain the gospel to children because it's extremely simple, or you can use it for any number of other things. But what we do is walk through the Roman Road together each Wednesday night for about 5 minutes before we get on to the main Bible study, kind of like you did back when you were a kid reciting the Pledge of Allegiance before starting class. What would happen was that over the course of your childhood, the Pledge of Allegiance got baked into your psyche, right? There are people who can't remember their own phone number, but if you called on them to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, they could do it with zero difficulty. We do a similar thing each week, not with the Pledge of Allegiance, but with the Roman Road, in the hopes that the repetition will cause it to sink down into our hearts and minds to become part of the language that we speak, that the gospel becomes just part of our vocabulary in the deepest parts of ourselves. Typically, I would ask for a volunteer to run through it, but obviously I can't do that when we're doing this online. I am talking to a camera and an empty set of windows. So what I'll do instead is run through the Roman Road for you. And so running through the Roman Road, there are 5 parts. We paraphrase 5 different verses from the book of Romans. We go Romans 1:20, Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23, Romans 5:8, and Romans 10:9. We'll paraphrase those one after another, just kind of based on what works for you. You're welcome to read the verses exactly the way that they are written, but just what I have found in my own experience is that it's better to simplify the language, make it real easy to understand right up front, and then you can dive a little bit deeper with people after you've kind of made it across the starting line. And so when I do the Roman Road, the way that I do it is I say some variation of this. According to Romans 1:21, God created you, and something in you knows that. But according to Romans 3:23, you have fallen short of the goodness God created you for. In fact, according to Romans 6:23, your sin is bad enough to merit your death. But according to Romans 5:8, Christ died to save you from your sin and death. And therefore, according to Romans 10:9, if you throw yourself on the mercy of Jesus, you will be saved. And so let's run through that just one more time, real quick. Just imagine that you're in a conversation with someone and they ask you what it is you believe, or they ask you what you mean when you say the gospel, or they ask you what it means to be a Christian, or anything along those lines. Just over the course of about 15 seconds, you can say, we believe, according to Romans 1:20, that God created us and that something in us knows that. But according to Romans 3:23, we have fallen short of the goodness God created us for. And more than that, according to Romans 6:23, our sin is bad enough to merit our death. But the good news is that according to Romans 5:8, Christ died to save us from our sin and death. And therefore, according to Romans 10:9, if we throw ourselves on the mercy of Jesus, we will be saved. That is the Roman Road. That's 5 short verses you can quickly just kind of rattle off if someone asks you to explain the basics of the gospel you believe. We will walk through that week by week. We will run through it every single week, kind of like you would run through the Pledge of Allegiance when you were at school as a kid, so that the repetition causes it to bury itself down deep in your head. Now, this may be new for some of our viewers this evening if you haven't been watching these since we broke almost a year ago for the pandemic, but what we've been doing is picking up where we left off several weeks ago in our Wednesday night Bible study series. What we've been doing is tracing through the main themes of the Bible very slowly, just a few passages at a time. We've been kind of loosely using the New Hampshire Confession of Faith. That is an old Baptist doctrinal statement from the early 1800s as a general guide, and then we've been looking closely at the passages of Scripture that it cites to really get our heads around how the Bible speaks into our lives. And so, picking it back up where we left off, we are looking at the New Hampshire Confession of Faith. It says, "We believe that election is the eternal purpose of God, according to which He graciously regenerates, sanctifies, and saves sinners. That being perfectly consistent with the free agency of man, it comprehends all of the means in connection with the end. That it is a most glorious display of God's sovereign goodness, being infinitely free, wise, holy, and unchangeable. That it utterly excludes boasting and promotes humility, love, prayer, praise, trust in God, and active imitation of His free mercy. That it encourages the use of means in the highest degree, that it may be ascertained by its effects in all who truly believe the gospel, that it is the foundation of Christian assurance, and that to ascertain it with regard to ourselves demands and deserves the utmost diligence." Now, I say this a lot, but that may have been a difficult paragraph to understand. This is a confession that was written in the 1830s, and the way people talked in the 1830s was different than the way that people talk today. That was normal people language back in 1833, but if somebody 200 years from now read something I wrote in normal people language today, it would sound difficult for them. And so don't be discouraged if you had a hard time understanding that paragraph. I'm going to read that each week that we are in this section. So for a few months and over time, just like with all the previous sections, I think that what you'll find is that the more familiar you become just with that paragraph, that section of the New Hampshire Confession, the more easily you'll be able to understand each individual line. You'll kind of learn it from the inside. That's the way it goes with quite a bit of what we do just as the people of God. We read the Scriptures and we struggle with them, but we start to learn the Scriptures from the inside. The language of Scripture that used to be confusing to us starts to make sense to us. Language that used to be really difficult for us to understand and digest eventually starts to become the language that we think in. And so over time, we begin to understand the Scriptures like the back of our hands. The same will happen with this, even though the language is a little bit difficult. And so one of the passages that the New Hampshire Confession is drawing from here in our section for this evening is 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 8 through 11. Once again, that's 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 8 through 11. This is a kind of a long passage, but I'm going to read the whole thing for you. Paul says, "But we know that the law is good, provided one uses it legitimately. We know that the law is not meant for a righteous person, but for the lawless and rebellious, for the ungodly and sinful, for the unholy and irreverent, for those who kill their fathers and mothers, for murderers, for the sexually immoral and homosexuals, for kidnappers, liars, perjurers, and for whatever else is contrary to the sound teaching based on the glorious gospel of the blessed God, which was entrusted to me. Let's take that point by point. Paul says, we know that the law is good, provided one uses it legitimately. He says, we know that the law is good, provided that one uses it legitimately. In other words, there is a right way and a wrong way to use the law. Now, it's important to point out here that when Paul says the law, he's not talking about the laws outlined in the statutory codes of the state of North Carolina. He's talking about the 613 collective laws outlined in the books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible, from Exodus through Deuteronomy. The laws that God gave to the Israelites were recorded and preserved for us together, and they even placed important historical stories in between them, just to give us a little bit of context about why God was giving us the laws that He was giving us. So if you haven't ever read through the first 5 books of the Bible, you should. I would strongly recommend it. I know they have a reputation for being really hard to read, and the reason for that is that they are really hard to read. That's true, there's no denying that, but you can power through it if you read about a chapter a day. You could do it in about 5 months at that rate. You can even get a group of other people together who have never read Genesis through Deuteronomy but want to, and you could get together either every day and do 1 chapter out loud as a group, or you could meet once a week and do about 7 chapters all in a row, just switching off on who reads what chapter. It would take like 30 minutes each time. That's how fast it would go. But Paul is talking about that. He's talking about God's law, the Mosaic law, the law of Israel. And even though today we tend to think of the Old Testament law as bad, right? Mostly because it's filled with stuff that shocks and frightens and grosses us out, Paul says we know that the law is good. Not bad. Good. Regardless of how you feel about any given law in the Old Testament, the reality is that the law is good. But there's a catch. The law is good under specific circumstances. The law is good in a specific context. You have to use the law the right way. The Christian extremists in Idaho who want to topple the U.S. government, trash the U.S. Constitution, and replace it with the 613 laws from the Old Testament are using the law the wrong way. That's not good. That's not legitimate. Paul says the law is good, provided we use it legitimately, provided we use it lawfully. That's the literal translation. He's making a pun. The law is good if you use it lawfully. We should embrace the law. We should love the law. We should read and learn from the law, but it's only actually any good for us when we use it legitimately. So how do you use the law legitimately? Paul tells us exactly how. He says, we know that the law is not meant for a righteous person. The law is not meant for a righteous person. What does that mean? There's a lot we could talk about, but we don't want to get lost in the weeds, so we'll cut straight to the chase. The law is not meant to serve as a step-by-step how to go to heaven manual. The law is not designed to justify you in the eyes of God. The law is not meant to make you worthy of God's love. The law is not meant to make you worthy of God's acceptance. And because it wasn't designed to do that, it doesn't do that. The law isn't meant to justify you, so it doesn't justify you. See how this works? It's kind of like how a toilet plunger wasn't meant to work as a defibrillator. So if you go into cardiac arrest and your friend decides to plunge your chest to get your heart back going again, you're probably going to die, because that's not what toilet plungers do. In the same way, a high school classmate of mine, who I won't name because I think we might still be friends on Facebook, got circumcised at 23. Because he had this epiphany, or he thought he did, that since God told the Israelites to get circumcised, that he needed to get circumcised too, or else he'd go to hell. Quite a few of us tried to talk him down, but there was just no stopping him. So he wasted a few $1,000s on an unnecessary procedure that God hadn't asked him to do because, try talking your insurance into covering your unnecessary adult circumcision and tell me how that goes. But that's just kind of a wacky example. The law is not meant for the righteous. It's not meant to make you righteous. It's not meant to get you in the door. The law doesn't save you. It never has. Your works don't save you. They never will. The good things you do won't make you acceptable to God. That's just not how it works. And so now that Paul has shown us what the law doesn't do, he shows us in vivid detail what it does do. What does the law do? He says the law is not for the righteous, but for the lawless and rebellious, for the ungodly and sinful, for the unholy and irreverent, for those who kill their fathers and mothers, for murderers, for the sexually immoral and homosexuals, for kidnappers, liars, perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to the sound teaching based on the glorious gospel of the blessed God, which was entrusted to me. So, that's an earful. Paul just listed out a whole slew of things you shouldn't do. He just listed out a whole litany of brandings that you take on based on your sinful patterns and habits. But if you can get past the drinking from the fire hose sensation that this passage creates, the point becomes a little clearer. He says the law is not for the righteous, but for the lawless and rebellious. The law is not for the righteous, but for the ungodly and sinful. The law is not for the righteous, but for the unholy and irreverent. The law is not for the righteous, but for those who kill their fathers and mothers. The law is not for the righteous, but for murderers. The law is not for the righteous, but for the sexually immoral and homosexuals. The law is not for the righteous, but for kidnappers. The law is not for the righteous, but for liars. The law is not for the righteous, but for perjurers. The list goes on. Who does the law benefit? It benefits sinners. Why? Because it shows you that you're a sinner. It benefits you by revealing that you've got a problem. It casts a black light on your lifestyle. It shows you where you're wrong, where you're warped and on the wrong track. But once it's done that, it doesn't leave you there. The point of the law is not to tear you down. It's to build you up. Because once you've seen with your own eyes and felt deep in your bones the depths of your own unholiness, then God can restore you in a way that you couldn't be restored beforehand. Once you recognize the vastness of your sin, then you're in a place to welcome the glorious gospel of the blessed God, which was entrusted to Paul. And as we learn this morning, that is step one in the process by which God saves you. Now, just like last week, this is kind of an elevator pitch as far as this concept goes, but with each passing week, we'll go over another one of the passages in Scripture that helps to illustrate and clarify what salvation looks like for us, so that with each passing week, the biblical picture of salvation will come just a little bit more clearly into view. But until next week, as always, I would like to remind you that even though we are temporarily shifting to a combination of online and drive-in services, the leadership at Mount Zion is still available to help you in any way that we are able. If you're a member of one of the groups that experts say are especially at risk for COVID-19, either because you're over 65 or you are somehow immunocompromised or you have certain pre-existing conditions that make COVID-19 particularly dangerous for you, reach out to us and let us serve you. We are here for you insofar as we are able to be. And so, as always, until next time, we love you, we miss you, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.